All right, we are just about ready to begin. Now I'm experimenting with different kinds of notes, and I want to take my time because I have only 4 pages of notes, and that gives me more latitude to try to be creative and give a more thorough talk. Now, in the talk preceding this, a month ago, we came back after a long session of questions and answers that I think took about 2 or 3 months. So what we did was a review. And it was a review of everything that we have done since the beginning of this subsection on cosmogony. And what we did is we talked about the first half of the evolutionary creation, which is involution. And involution means turning into matter. Literally, that's what it means. And you turn into matter as far as you can go. That is the objective. And then the experience that you reap along the way is taken back into the spirit, and that second half is called evolution. And that is what we will be talking about for quite a while now, the evolutionary half as opposed to the involutionary half. Now we said we are just past the turning point. The turning point is not something like you come to the end of a road and you have to turn around. The turning point is in consciousness. Your consciousness is directed in a different way. Now, in some ways, the turning point is very sharp and very abrupt compared to everything that had preceded, even though, as we know, in any kind of evolution, even materialistic evolution, everything is slow and gradual. Now, things that happen in the evolutionary creation are not rigid. It's not like a machine that this cog fits into this gear and such like that. In fact, some of our human life wave, all of the people that are human now and going through the human-like condition, whether incarnate or disincarnate, not everybody has turned the corner. This means that even though most people have turned the corner and are evolving out of matter, some have not gone into matter completely enough to go into that second part, where we come back out of matter. So, the evolutionary creation is flexible. In order to understand what that turning point is, we have to understand how we are different now than from when we were involving. Now, the turning point that turns from involution to evolution can be stated in one very simple sentence. It is that the turning point from involution to evolution occurs at the moment of waking self-consciousness. So the turning point between involution and evolution is waking self-conscious. consciousness. During the entire involution, we began deeply unconscious, and gradually we came closer and closer to consciousness. And when we once become self-conscious and we're awake and aware of it, then everything changes. I won't go into like how many years ago that happened, or even in what epoch it happened. But the point is that we have turned the corner. Now there are some human beings that have not done that yet. They are still unaware of themselves in waking self-consciousness. Now this may sound strange because in our self-consciousness we take it for granted. Some people even think that animals are wakingly self-conscious in a deliberately spiritual way. There is an inductive consciousness that some animals have, pets that have been associated with human beings, but it's not the same thing as waking individual self-consciousness. Now the people who have not turned the corner and do not have waking self-consciousness cannot separate themselves from the collective. Whether that collective is a family or a tribe or something like that. The way it works, until we can be individual and do things on our own, we are collectively guided by what is called a group spirit, or some people, there are religious spirits, but at any rate, they're all part of one spirit. Like, for example, an animal. If an animal is wounded, not only does that animal feel the experience, the entire species feels the experience, because the entire species is part of the same group or collective spirit. Now, this has to be looked into a little bit more carefully. People do not, or the people who have not turned the corner, do not regard themselves as separate spiritual entities. That is, beings. Now they may be keenly aware of the environment, and more keenly aware of the environment than humans are. We find that with even lower things are more aware of the environment than humans are. They have more keen senses, and for their very survival, they need to have that. And it doesn't mean that they don't have some kind of ability to function in the external world. They have that, but it is more of an instinctual thing. They don't think things through, they don't see things separately, and they don't see themselves separately. Now, they're even aware of their bodies, but they're aware of their bodies in a very strange way. They see themselves as extensions of the collective. Now, mind you, there are very few people like this left on Earth. Very few that have not turned the corner, and they're diminishing all the time because the inductive effect of others around them having self-consciousness gives a psychic environment that makes waking self-consciousness easier for them. Now, when they are aware of the collective, of say of a tribe or a clan or something of that nature, they have a collective consciousness that is not the same thing as an individual consciousness. Now, this isn't the same thing as if a mystic has a mystical experience and is aware that the mystic is part of a universal spirit. That is a voluntary, conscious, controlled activity. It's very much different than an instinctual consciousness through a involuntary kind of clairvoyance. All right. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I just want to mention that that is what the turning point is, and that is the fact that most people have turned that corner. Now, just a few moments ago, we said that the evolutionary creation is not rigid. It's not set. It's not mechanical. It could also be said about the process that it is not smooth and regular, that everything goes according to schedule, the way everything would go. And all the participants are different. This is, when you have individuals, you're going to have all sorts of individuals. Now, some people attain to self-consciousness before others do. And you can even say that some people are more self-conscious than others. In fact, the difference in some cases is dramatic, that for some individuals, when they are self-conscious, they are really super self-conscious of things that we almost can't dream of in our everyday consciousness. Now, we got to keep in mind that we're talking about spiritual things and we're not talking about material things. Now, some of the things we're going to talk about are difficult for me to verbalize, just because the very nature of the subject is hard to verbalize in the first place. And I'm somewhere along that gradient of self-consciousness. And there are things that I know are there, but that I'm not there yet. I'm not walking around in a perpetual state of enlightenment. So, what I'm trying to say is that there are many things in the subject of consciousness and self-consciousness to which I cannot speak. And when those topics come up along the way, I will plead ignorance. All right. Now, what we want to do is we want to look into consciousness a little bit. And that's going to occupy us for the rest of the evening. One way that we come to self-consciousness is through exercises, through spiritual exercises. You might say that exercises are things that are used to change our general waking state. We can't always be in the consciousness of the exercise, and we can't exercise in that much because we would soon fatigue ourselves. But by applying exercises in specific ways, we can acquire or get to where we want to get in consciousness. So we're going to talk a little bit about spiritual exercises. Now, this is not a thorough rendition. Eventually, we'll have a sub-series of talks about spiritual exercises. This is just something to introduce them and to give you some idea of their relationship to consciousness. Now, one of the most basic spiritual exercises is something that everybody does every day, but not always with full intention. It is exercises involving observation and discrimination. The idea is that with intention, deliberately, we observe things, and we try to observe them more and more clearly, and that we absorb our attention into observation. Now, we come to know the world more clearly when we practice observation. A person who practices observation has a great advantage over those that do not. I suppose we have all read the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, in which Sherlock Holmes practices observation and discrimination with alarming or very exciting understanding that it's like he lives in a different world from us, from his ability to observe things. Now, we intentionally give ourselves to observing, and that doesn't mean only vision. It applies to any of the senses. It applies to hearing, and it even applies to touch. Now, when we observe something, we understand our observation and whether it's correct in what it means by discriminating. If we have observed something very clearly, we can discriminate it from other things that are similar. So that is where the accuracy of observation is proven. It is proven in discrimination. And discrimination is the ability to tell the difference of one thing from another, to discriminate between them. Now, because we're self-conscious and we can find ways to test our discrimination, that doesn't necessarily determine whether our discrimination is correct. That's something that comes further on, and that's something that we're not really going to go into. The purpose right now is to basically become aware and discern discrete differences from reality. And reality in this case is we're talking about the outer external physical world. This exercise applies to other worlds, but we're being much more simple about that. And those are things that will come along the way. We are in the chemical subdivision of the physical world. When we look out, we're looking at the chemicals. And the chemical subdivision of the physical world is different from all of the other worlds. Things are discrete. Things, if you look at an object, I'm looking at chairs in this room, and it's very clear that one can see where the chair ends and where there is negative space around the chair. You might say that in this regard, the chemical subdivision of the physical world is a training place. If we can observe and discriminate here, that prepares us for observing and discriminating in the higher spiritual worlds. So this is the trainer wheels for us. I don't know how to say it, but the chemical physical world is fundamental. Is that object here or is it not here? And things are much more certain and unchanging in the objects that we see around us in the physical world. So in this regard, the concrete subdivision of the physical world is different from all of the higher worlds. And we'll go into that. But we can say right now that even the more rare things in the chemical subdivision, such as gases and liquids, they are easily objectively differentiated. For example, in South America, there's a place where the Rio Negro flows into the Amazon River, and they go down the same channel, but they don't blend together. It's like saying there's two different kinds of water. One kind, the Amazon, is tan, and the Rio Negro is black, it's dark. And this is a way to show that even the liquids, there are distinct differences one from another. If you dive into a pond and go to the bottom, you'll notice that you go through zones, and those zones have different temperatures in them. And the same thing happens in the gases. At this time of the year, living in Wisconsin, cold air masses come down from the Arctic. And when they come down, there's a very sharp division sometimes between warm air, which is not so heavy or not so massive, and the cold air. It's almost like you can feel something pass by you when a cold front moves in. So, this is a way that the physical world, where observation and discrimination here are simple and obvious, they are beginning for us, and they're very fundamental. The ability to separate one thing from another, which doesn't happen so easily in the higher worlds. Now, if we get into the desire world, things are different. Now, clearly, there are things that occur in the desire world that are objective. They are discrete, but not in the same way. For example, if you take something like anger, clearly that is an objective emotion in the desire world, or what some people call it the astral world. But it's different. It's when you have a moment of anger, it gradates and lives together with other emotions. Now, in the physical world, like if you get on a computer, you can make a gradation of colors, but those are only mechanical, and those have that certain discrete quality about them. But in the desire world, where an emotion ends and where it begins and what its dimensionality is are not so easy to determine. Our feelings might be very distinct, but they are not, there might be others, if you're angry, you have self-recriminations. You have all sorts of other feelings that go about it. You have regret or something of that nature, and you have all sorts of, and When you feel the anger, you don't feel the anger alone. Very rarely do you see in the desire world, or even watching emotional behavior in humans, very rare that you find anything like a singular emotion. Now, things flow into each other more in the higher spiritual worlds. Now, some of that is due to the fact that you are one step closer to the universal spirit in consciousness. And therefore, there is more unity, and one thing is not so separated from the others. Now, I don't know if you see them or not, but I see them all over on the internet because I have a lot of friends, my Facebook friends, a lot of them are spiritual seekers, and you'll see a lot of those paintings. I should have brought one here. A lot of these paintings where it's not like a Dutch master where everything, every little detail is physically there. In these paintings, there are objects, but the objects themselves are fuzzy, and they are in an aura or in an environment of color. Now, that's not just an artistic style. That is an attempt to convey what it is like to perceive things in the desire world, where things are part of each other. Just a few minutes ago, we talked about people being under the control of some kind of collective spirit. And that collective spirit, it has a visible presence also, and that interpenetrates the invisible presence of the person that it is guiding. So so now, because they are not distinct doesn't mean that they aren't real. If somebody's angry at you and projects that anger, you know very clearly that it's real. The same thing is true with love or with gratitude or things of that nature. They're not unreal. They're real. It's just a different kind of reality. And in some ways, that kind of reality is more powerful than the one that we live in every day. Okay. Now, we're going to go into these things more along the way. Now, more that self-consciousness is unfolding, observation and discrimination and other exercises make us more aware of it. Oh, this could be a long night if I go at the pace that I'm going now. All right. We are mentioning exercises primarily for awakening to self-consciousness. And I want to look at one more that is more direct to that end. And eventually we'll discuss it also more thoroughly. But right now, it's just appropriate to introduce and give you a context. One way to awaken spiritual self-consciousness is to do things self-consciously. We think we do that, but do we really do that? This applies to the little things in life as well as to the great things in life. Suppose, for example, we're making dinner and we're cutting up the ingredients for a meal. We're careful that we don't cut our fingers, so we have a certain amount of self-consciousness there, but very rarely do we hold it in our attention as if to say, I am cutting these vegetables intentionally, so that even when we're careful to take care that we don't cut our fingers, we're only semi-self-consciousness. Again, we're dealing with a whole gradation again that we can't say this ends here and this and the next is the next step. We're talking about something inward. A lot of things in life we take for granted. It's even things that we do daily, things that we used to do with self-consciousness. And in this, we forget ourselves and we just do them. For example, do you remember when you first learned how to print in grade school? Or how to do cursive? It was, I can still call some of those things back. It was very hard. It took a while to master the skill to make the shapes that we wanted to make that were like the examples in our instruction books. Once we mastered those skills, we did not have to do them deliberately, at least not with that same kind of deliberateness. And when we're children, we're not really self-conscious anyway. We're just working toward self-consciousness, which comes later. So a lot of things that are difficult for us to do at first, and we give our attention to them with great deliberation and concentration until we can do them. And then we let them slip into semi-unconsciousness. We just take them for granted. And this applies to big things in life as well as to little things in life. And this is so difficult because we forget ourselves and we forget the reality that we are in and we forget what we're doing. It applies to big things that are important. For example, we are not always thinking when we think we are thinking. We are putting ourselves into a psychic posture that is like what it is when we think, and we are producing variations on thoughts that have already been thought, but we are not really thinking. We are not coming to conclusions, not like in the Descartes sense. Moreover, our consciousness is divided. We have a self and we have a pseudo-self. And that pseudo-self is meant for our protection, and it does things so that we don't have to give our full attention to everything. Mind you, we're trying to come into an understanding of something that, it's somewhere in between a number of things. And this lower self takes care of us. Unfortunately, it takes care of itself only, itself as well. But a lot of things, if we desire something, we don't always think it out how we're going to get it. There's a kind of cunning. And that cunning, when it enters our consciousness, I don't like it. It feels kind of slimy to me, but it gets what it wants. The desire is satisfied. And so not only do we have to become conscious of reality and conscious of ourself watching reality, we have to control the part of our consciousness that has a high degree of automacy. So, in such a case, thinking is not what we think it is. Now, when this practice of deliberately, intentionally, self-consciously doing things, an objection comes up. Somebody will say something to the effect, I can't live that way. I've got a life to live. It's impossible. Now, there is no answer to that. because we do have responsibilities, and we have to fulfill those responsibilities. But exercises are different than performance. If you have a pianist, the pianist will do exercises to warm up certain muscles or to develop certain muscles, and after that period of exercises is over, then he goes into performing, into practice, or like that. And it's the same thing with spiritual exercise. Doing things with deliberate, intentional self-consciousness really brings the spirit to bear on life. And like any exercise, it spreads throughout the rest of life, so that you don't have to live your whole life in almost like giving yourself a spiritual hernia and trying to be super self-conscious about everything. The important thing is that we are capable of being aware of ourselves, and that we practice that. And that changes our general conscious awakening altogether. What we are in ourself becomes more clear to us. We don't need somebody outside of us to tell us what we are if we're really practicing, if we're practicing observation and discrimination on ourselves, and if we're doing things with full deliberation, we can very well find out what we are like. So, what we're talking about is the doer being aware of the doing, which is both projective and it's reflective. It's projective in that you're putting your consciousness into something, and it's reflective in that you're understanding yourself as you're doing it, and what you are that is doing it. So self-consciousness is an awareness of self in whatever the self is engaged, including its own self-engagement. You become aware of trying to be aware of yourself. And that is, that sounds like some kind of neurosis, but if you practice it by getting there from deliberate self-application, you do become aware of yourself doing that. And that is, you become an exceedingly conscientious person. Not a neurotically conscientious person that is afraid of hurting something or making a mistake or something like that, but a full-blown self-conscious individual. So the self is the doer, and being aware of the self and being aware of the doing and being aware of the doing, that is what we're trying to get to. When people start doing this, especially looking at the reflective part of watching the doing and seeing the doer do it, sometimes people have transcendent self-consciousness. Because the self is not just limited to the petty performances of life. The self is divine, and it has divine matters to see to, that it has to look into. We remember, we've looked at it in an intellectual way. We have said that the self is a threefold spiritual being. It has will, it has imagination in life, and it has an idea of itself. It is a focus. It's a focused being. And since the self, the threefold spirit through the self, is focused into the abstract region of the world of thought, it's an idea. What our self really is. And this is what you learn when you have this kind of experience of self-watching and watching self-watching. You realize that what you're doing is an idea. But it's not like an idea of how am I going to drive across town, like the idea of what is important. It is a divinely conceived idea. A self as a divine being is something that we can't do yet. That's a long, long distance away from where we are now. So we are ideas. Now some people take offense at that idea, but it really is true. Now, the transcendent experiences of self are also a matter of degree. Things in spirit are a matter of degree. They are intensive. Now, in conventional Christianity, this is well known. Self-consciousness of a transcendent type is well known. It's called the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And people do experience it, but they don't know they don't have the culture, and they're not familiar with it yet, that they can discern the fullness of that spiritual experience. But they have it, and it's real, and it's no doubt to them at all. I can give you a little anecdote. You have people like me, the Holy Ghost Christians are exceedingly cautious of people like me because they think I'm of the devil or something like that. But occasionally, if you're very, very careful, you can engage them in conversations, and you can see whether their experience is genuine or not. Or you can see whether they understood what their experience was. And I was at a church one time, and I met someone who had the experience of the Holy Ghost. And I began talking to him very circumspectly and very cautiously, and I said, isn't it a little bit like when you prove a theorem in mathematics and you get the idea and the lights go on and it becomes universal and you can see that it goes through many things? And yes, he said, that is what it is like. And then he got very cautious, and the conversation ended very, very shortly after that. Now, this is known all over the world, and I'm wanting to talk about how consciousness is itself evolving and how it is culture-bound. Now, the baptism of the Holy Spirit in India is called Savikalpa Samadhi. And it is to be differentiated from Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And Nirvikalpa Samadhi is more like what Christians call the experience of Christ consciousness, which very, very few have, and they are usually great mystics that have it. What's happening is whether somebody in India has an experience of Savikalpa Samadhi and somebody has a baptism by the Holy Spirit, the experience is the same. But the way the experience is interpreted is determined by culture. It'll always, most of the people who have that experience in India are people who have steeped themselves for many years in a whole metaphysics surrounding it. But beyond that, the capacity of humans to have that experience in a more thorough way is also evolving. So there's not only a cultural conditioning difference between the past ways that are still practiced in India and modern Christianity. It is, in fact, that there is an evolution. And that's not something to take offense at. I don't take offense if somebody understands something better than I do. It gives me a opportunity to have something to aim for. So there is an evolution in the quality and in the degree of equality. In fact, as we go on, we have more soul material, and when we have more soul material, we can enter into spiritual experiences like baptisms of the Holy Spirit in a deeper way. All right. Again, this is just introductory. We're going to come back to this again, and we're going to talk about it, a whole series to talk about it. Now, for now, we want to switch gears a little bit, and we want to talk about consciousness itself. And it might sound absurd, but it is a valid question to ask, where is one conscious? Where is one conscious? And let's take a very simple experience. Suppose you're doing some remodeling or building something, and you have an event. And that event is something that we've all experienced. Let's take the example of pain. Suppose you're hammering a nail, and you don't maintain deliberate self-consciousness, and you miss the nail, and you hit the fingers that are supporting it. Immediately, there is a change in consciousness. That change in consciousness is the experience of pain. So, we want to know, where is one consciousness? Where is the pain? Where are we conscious of pain? Now, for most people, the immediate answer would be in the fingers. And if somebody wanted to fortify that statement, they would say it's in the fingers because that's where the stressed nerves are located. Some neurophysiologists would say, no, it's in the brain, because that is where we have what we call consciousness. Neurophysiologists are very, very skeptical about the idea of discrete consciousness outside of neurophysical actions. Now, the mystic would answer all of these and saying that, no, that is not where we feel pain. Now, the physical body is a really marvelous instrument. If you read a book on physiology, every time you turn a page, you come across a whole bunch of new miracles. The sophistication of the physical body is almost beyond belief. What it does, and what it does so well, even in cases of injury or infirmity or sickness or something like that, it still functions so well. And it functions even when we're not consciously aware of it, which is another subject that we're not going to go into, at least right now. Now, scientists, physiologists, and physiological chemists and people like that are finding all sorts of new things about the physical body all the time. It goes on and on. A physiology textbook often goes obsolete by the time it's off the presses, as if it's an advanced book. The simple stuff remains pretty much the same. Now, despite all of this sophistication of the physical body, it is composed of chemicals, chemicals of the chemical subdivision of the physical world. And they are inert and insensible. So one wonders, how are these inert, insensible things feeling pain? Probably not at all. But they may be transferring an experience. Energies affect inert chemicals, and maybe that's what is happening. So one might want to ask, what is pain? And in this sense, it would be a stress on insensible atoms, which certainly if you get a sliver, which is a very special kind of a pain, it's absurd to call that a stress on insensible atoms. Now, the temptation is to say that the body feels the pain, especially the brain. Materialistic-minded people think that is the truth. They think that's what's happening. But the body is an organization of insensible chemicals. Can an organization feel pain? An organization can be made to transfer certain kinds of energies, like if we're looking at things and we're seeing things, light goes into the retina, and that gets changed into a neural impulse, which goes into the various parts of the brain that interpret that, and then it gets passed on to the etheric brain. So the body, as an organization, is organized to do some things, but it isn't necessarily the body isn't where we feel the pain. The body is where the energy that we interpret as a pain is carried through. Now, those energies are in the ethers. They're in the etheric vital body. Each of the chemical atoms and molecules is floating in a sea of energy, and there are energies. There is organization of the energy so that things are made to flow. So that is what happens with a physical sensation. It is transferred by energy through the ethers. Now, the way that energy is carried is a miracle in itself. Our eyes are wonderful. We can see, if a person is sitting on the side of a desert mountain and a person strikes a match 15 miles away, somebody can see that match being struck. This is what I'm talking about on a moonless night, that this is something that can be happening. But all of the senses are this way, and all of it is carried through the energies. Helen Keller, who was blind and deaf, became so sensitive in her fingers that if she passed her fingers over a drawing or a painting, she could tell what the colors were, because her sensitivity was that great. So, energy is transferred from the physical through the ethers into the desire body. And it is carried into the central region of the desire body which is called the region of feeling. Now, the transfer of the energies from the vital body to the desire body is very different than the transfer of feeling or transfer of an experience from the chemicals to the ethers, because the chemicals and the ethers are both part of the physical world. The desire world is a completely different world. And the desire world has different laws and different principles. They're analogous to those in the physical world. We know that. The principle of analogy works through all of the worlds. But the transfer between two worlds is very different. So, how is this accomplished? Now, mystics find that the transfer of things from world to world is accomplished through resonance. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word works through everything. That means the entire creation, that there is a resonance between everything in the creation, and the different worlds can be seen almost like different notes on a scale. Now, it shouldn't surprise us that the pain of a hammer on fingers should be resonantly passed between the ethers and the desire body. Think about a sensitive violinist. All that is a vibrating resonant string, but it carries much more than pitch. It carries much more than pitch and timbre. It carries the whole quality of feeling, the thought, the spirit of the performer. So it's not surprising that there should be a resonance that works in this way. Now we come to questions I can't answer, but I'm going to throw the questions out anyway for something for you to think about. The question is something lost in the transfer of experience from the physical world to the desire world, or between any two worlds for that matter? And I can't even speculate on that. On one hand, I like to think that in the universe, because it is all of the one, nothing is lost. But that's a vague generalization, and that vague generalization doesn't answer the very question that we're trying to ask. On the other hand, you think there must be something that doesn't make it, because they're two different worlds. If the information could pass from one world to another whole cloth as one thing, then there would just be one world and there wouldn't be two different worlds. So I don't have an answer on that. I put it out there, and it's something that you may want to think about. And there's always that question address that we have on the bulletin at the beginning of the talk, and you can always send me an answer. In any case, the experience is now a feeling. And it's a feeling that has a certain amount of life to it. It has other dimensions to it. We have all kinds of feelings about the pain. Things flow into each other, and pain is much more, People who suffer pain think about a lot of things. They think about the cause, or they experience feelings that are similar to it. A mother who has given birth to a child has very different feelings about pain, and whether she can generalize them between hitting your fingers with a hammer and giving birth to a child. Those are quite, the experience is enriched in the desire world. Now, in the region of feeling, we are inclined to think that this is where we feel pain. And a mystic would say, that's not quite the truth. That's not quite the way it is. That begs the question immediately, if we don't feel it in the desire world, in the region of feeling, where do we feel it? And the mystic has a very simple answer for that. In the spirit. We feel things in the spirit. They're not the same thing as the physical sensation. They are spiritual experiences. Now, various worlds and states of spirit are reflections of each other. The physical body is a reflection of the divine spirit. The will to be is expressed in staticity in the physical. The ethers, the vitality, the life, the biological existence is reflected in the life spirit, which is the imagination, which is the flow, part of the threefold spirit. And the desire body is reflected in the human spirit. Consciousness is of and in the spirit. Now, there is a quasi-consciousness in the region of feeling, and in all the worlds themselves, there is a potential consciousness. There's a quasi-awake or quasi-unawake consciousness in each of the worlds. But to go into that is beyond the scope of these talks for now. We'll eventually get to something like that. Now, while we're on this, there's one little tidbit I'd like to talk to, and that is when the spirit is conscious of something, the spirit is capable of not responding to it. And in fact, in some schools of spiritual thought, I don't agree with them, there is to put one's consciousness into the transcendental, and when there is pain, to turn it off, to not respond to it. I think that's a mistake. That is an escapist way of looking at things. It's as if pain or any sensation is bad, because usually those are the kinds of people that think material experience is bad also. But it is there for a full experience, and it is a denial to not have that full experience. All right, we've answered a very silly question. Where are we conscious of pain? Now, we've been talking about the bodies. We've been talking about the chemical body, we've been talking about the etheric body, and we've been talking about the emotional or desire body. There is another name for them. The other name for them is they are called vehicles of consciousness. They are also, I don't know how to say it, they carry consciousness. as we have seen, this is a whole other way of looking at what we've looked at during the whole of involution. We have evolved these vehicles of consciousness to be aware of things in the worlds, in the unknown. Now, they're not the consciousness itself, but they are vehicles of consciousness, and they adapt themselves to the spirit from which those vehicles are a reflection of. Now, to carry the experience to and from the spirit, that's what the work is. They're vehicles. They carry spiritual impulses into the personal existence, into the world where we live and where we garner experience, and they carry that experience back to the spirit. So that's it. They're the means of experience. Now, this immediately begs a question. It begs a question, what are the worlds? Why are they so important that the Spirit has condensed them or has brought them into being? And why the vehicles of consciousness between the microcosmic bodies, the worlds are macrocosmic bodies, and the Spirit? Why are the worlds so important? Now, this is something that we've said several times, but it's one of those things that's important, and we want to go into it more and look at it now from another point of view, because it's ripe. The more points of view that we have of looking at these things, the more we can understand the reality that we live in and work better with it. At one time, we have said that the worlds are interfaces between the known and the unknown. Now, the principle of analogy says that this is true in macrocosm and in microcosm. In our bodies relating to the worlds, our bodies are the interfaces between the unknown and the known, and the worlds are the interfaces in macrocosm between the known and the unknown. However, in the macrocosm there's something much more, but we'll have a little bit of that at the end. Now, what I'm going to say now is very brief, very fast, in my kind of fast, which probably means 20 minutes, and it's sketchy. And it is an application of the principle of analogy. And the subject is acquiring knowledge. When we acquire knowledge, we know something. So, making the unknown known is acquiring knowledge. And that means the interaction between the known and the unknown. We are agents. Since we are self-conscious, we are agents for bringing experience from the various worlds in which we participate and bringing that experience into consciousness in the spirit. We're consciously awake, but we're aware. And we are aware that there are things we do not know. And on top of that, we have a genuine curiosity. We do want to know things. And we're seekers. So when we're ignorant and unknowing, we do things to come to know things. We set up experiments, not necessarily like scientific laboratories, but that's a good example. Our whole lives are experiments in how well we understand reality, and we'll have more of that next time. So they're experiments to determine what things are and to know them. Life experiments are not exactly scientific experiments, but they're perfectly valid. Now, when we set up experiments, we have hypotheses as our interface between the known and the unknown. So our bodies are also hypotheses, you can say. What are hypotheses? They're guesses. They're guesses based on our past experience. Well, in the past I knew this and I knew that, so maybe this unknown thing is an extension of this. It's like this. And when we look at our hypotheses in science, we have a whole history of science, and as science evolves, so to speak. And when we project our hypothesis on life, we're projecting a history of our character. In reality, we're projecting the part of our character that we have known what it is from past experience. And we project it into the unknown as a hypothesis, which is a guess. And in a way, it's almost like a dream. So in effect, we're projecting a conscious part of ourself into the unknown. Now, when we do this and we try to live out the hypothesis, sometimes the hypothesis doesn't match the unknown. If our hypotheses matched what we think is the unknown, it would be known. And some people believe more in their hypotheses than they do in the hypothesis as a means to know things. These are people that want to live in their dream, and they're not really wanting to know reality. So, we project our hypothesis, and it doesn't fit reality. And when it doesn't fit reality, our guess or our dream is waked up a little bit. We say, oh, it isn't like that. And if we try to make our hypothesis fit, it feels like reality is fighting. And so that's the way, these are things we've heard many times. Reality fights back, so to speak. All right. So what do? We change the hypothesis. And we change it according to how we think this part of reality works that we're looking into. And we keep on modifying the hypothesis until it matches the reality. And it explains the reality, and it is now known. At this point in science, the hypothesis becomes a scientific principle, or some call it a law of nature, or something of that nature. Now, this is an extremely simplified statement, but a lot of things in our life, in our social life, in our intellectual life, where we encounter struggle, this is what we can consciously do. We're talking about developing consciousness. And if we are not just struggling with an unknown, but if we're looking at our hypothesis and trying to adjust it to what the data is or to what the experience is when we project that hypothesis, this is how we learn. If our mother-in-law is unpleasant when we bring this subject up, that means we have to adjust our hypothesis about what it works for communicating with a mother-in-law. That sort of a thing. So our bodies are the instruments that which are hypotheses themselves through which we carry out experiences. When we have emotional traumas is when we're learning something about the nature of the emotional world, of the desire world, and that is very important. Now, this is how we see things in the microcosm. Now, it is a good idea to see how it works in the macrocosm. Now, we could do this simply, and we could say that the macrocosm is the collection of all of the microcosms that participate in evolution. That's true, but it's incomplete. It's the kind of thing that happens when you try to explain or describe the greater when you have something lesser. It can't do it. It's incomplete. And yes, it goes to that thing of the incompleteness hypothesis, but I don't want to go into that. It's too much for tonight. So when it happens, we're trying to explain something that we can't really explain. And at times like this, for me, there is a Bible verse, something to the effect of the following, that is always helpful. And that statement is, the ways of God are strange to the ways of men. The microcosm is analogous to the macrocosm. And the macrocosm is more. It's fundamental. It's the source of everything that is in the microcosm. The macrocosm does project its hypothesis as the creative scheme. We've been studying that so arduously now for quite a long time. It does much more than that. It projects the very opportunity for creating the ability to project hypotheses. That's a very big statement. It projects the very opportunity for all of the creatures to project hypotheses. That's the fundamental way that the urge to know comes from the macrocosm. Now, I don't like to use some words too freely because it tends to debase them and to make them commonplace, but sometimes it gets to the point of blasphemy. But in short, this is what makes God God. This is what separates God in the world of God. If you remember when we looked at all the different worlds in which the creation takes place, that God alone is in that world. All right. That is, we're going to take off from here and do something more with this in the next talk in January. I'm excited. I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun, and I hope it's enlightening, and I hope it's practical, and I hope it's edifying also. So thank you very much for allowing me to share what I like to share.